The Montana Territory, 1885. The dying light of sunset cast long shadows across Redemption Creek, a frontier town nestled between the unforgiving mountains and the vast prairie. Thomas Blackwood sat motionless on his weathered porch, his calloused hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold. At 52, his face was a roadmap of hardship, deep lines carved by desert sun, sorrow, and survival. 20 years as a U.S. Marshall had taught him that justice and law were often strangers to each other in these parts. The rhythmic creak of his rocking chair was the only sound breaking the evening stillness. 3 months into retirement, Thomas had settled on the outskirts of town, far enough away from trouble, but close enough to civilization. His reputation still commanded respect, or fear, depending on who you asked. The townsfolk treated him with cautious reverence, the weight of his past deeds hanging invisibly around him like a shroud. Folks, thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know what city you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. His retirement had been uneventful until tonight. The approaching horse caught his attention long before it came into view. He could read a rider's intentions from the pace of hoofbeats. These were urgent, desperate. Thomas reached instinctively for the Colt Peacemaker that never left his side, even in supposed peace. The Winchester rifle leaning against the doorframe was never far from reach either. Eleanor Wright appeared at the edge of his property, her chestnut mare kicking up dust as she approached. At 38, Eleanor was a woman of uncommon resilience. Widowed 5 years earlier, she had transformed her husband's struggling general store into the most prosperous business in 3 counties. Her auburn hair, normally pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, now flew wild in the wind. Her riding dress was covered in trail dust, and fear had replaced her usual composed expression. "Thomas," she called out, dismounting with practiced ease, despite her evident distress. "They've taken everything. The store, my savings, they're coming after the ranch next." Her voice cracked with exhaustion and fury rather than tears. Eleanor had never been one for weeping, even when they buried her husband after the mining accident. "Sheriff Miller's been bought. Judge Holloway too." Thomas offered no immediate reply, instead guiding her to the porch and pouring a measure of whiskey from a nearby bottle. "Start from the beginning," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. His steel-gray eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, studied her face. He had known Eleanor for nearly a decade, had watched her rebuild her life through sheer force of will. To see her frightened was unsettling. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the drink. "It's the Hargrove Mining Company," she explained, the name alone making Thomas's jaw tighten. "They've been buying up everything along Silver Creek. My land sits right where they want to run their new rail spur." She took a steadying breath. "At first they offered to buy. When I refused, things changed." Thomas nodded slowly, memories stirring like awakened snakes. Maxwell Hargrove had been building his empire for 15 years, swallowing small claims and pushing out honest folk through methods that grew increasingly ruthless. The territorial government turned a blind eye, seduced by promises of progress and prosperity. "What changed exactly?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he already knew. "First it was just threats," Eleanor said, her voice steadying as she spoke. "Then my suppliers started canceling orders. The bank called in my loan without warning. Yesterday, they produced papers, forged but with the judge's stamp, claiming my husband had outstanding debts. They seized the store this morning." Her eyes flashed with righteous anger. Sheriff Miller stood by and watched. "My ranch is next, Thomas. My home. Everything I fought for." The night had fully settled now, wrapping them in darkness pierced only by the warm glow from Thomas's cabin windows. He had built this place with his own hands, hoping for peace in his final years. But peace, he was reminded, was a luxury in territories where law was still being written, often in blood. "How many men does Hargrove have?" he asked, already calculating odds and strategies. "At least 15, Eleanor replied, her business mind precise, even in crisis. "Hired guns from down Colorado way. Their leader is a man called Silas Reed. Cruel eyes. Speaks like an educated man, but has the soul of a rattlesnake." She hesitated. "They've given me until noon tomorrow to leave the ranch." After that, she didn't need to finish. They both understood frontier justice. Thomas rose from his chair, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. Age had done little to diminish his imposing presence. "Get some rest," he said, gesturing toward the cabin. "We leave for your ranch at first light." His decision made, he felt a familiar calm settle over him, the clarity that always came before conflict. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, then gratitude, though concern quickly followed. "Thomas, I came to ask for advice, maybe a loan to fight them legally," she protested weakly, though relief was evident in her voice. "I didn't come to drag you into a war. These aren't just local thugs. Hargrove has connections all the way to Washington." She stood, facing him directly. "This isn't your fight." Thomas allowed himself a rare, grim smile. "It became my fight when they decided the law doesn't matter in Redemption Creek." He moved to the edge of the porch, looking out into the darkness as if already seeing the confrontation to come. "I swore an oath, Eleanor. It didn't end when I handed in my badge." Dawn brought a chill that seeped through layers of clothing and settled in the bones. Thomas prepared methodically, loading ammunition into his saddlebags with the deliberate precision of a man who understood that survival often hinged on preparation. His dark duster, worn from years on the trail, still fit comfortably over shoulders that carried invisible weights. Eleanor watched from the cabin doorway, her face set with determination, despite the sleepless night. "You should reconsider," she said quietly, as Thomas secured his rifle to his saddle. "Maxwell Hargrove isn't a man who forgets those who cross him. Even if we win today, he'll keep coming." Her concern wasn't just for herself, Thomas realized. She was offering him a way out, a return to the retirement he had sought. Instead of answering immediately, Thomas checked the action on his peacemaker, the familiar weight centering him like an old friend. "Eleanor," he finally responded, "I've spent my life watching what happens when good people step aside for men like Hargrove." His voice carried no bravado, only the weathered certainty of experience. "First they take a little, then more. Eventually, there's nothing left to protect." He mounted his stallion, a powerful black gelding named Shadow that had carried him through countless dangers. "I've lost too many battles by not fighting them. Not this time." The 12-mile ride to Eleanor's ranch gave Thomas time to assess what they were facing. Eleanor explained that her property, nearly 400 acres of prime grazing land with reliable water access, was the last obstacle to Hargrove's complete control of the valley. "The Silver Vein runs right through the eastern ridge," she noted as they rode side by side. "My husband suspected it, but never had the capital to explore properly." Thomas nodded, understanding the true value of her land beyond mere acreage. "Hargrove doesn't want to mine your property," he concluded. He wants to make sure nobody else can. The territorial mining laws were clear. Whoever owned surface rights controlled what lay beneath. Eleanor's ranch was more than a home. It was potential wealth that threatened Hargrove's monopoly. As they crested the final hill overlooking Widow's Ridge Ranch, Thomas reined in shadow to survey the situation. The main house stood proudly on a gentle rise, 2 stories of solid craftsmanship with a wide wraparound porch. Several outbuildings, a barn, and corrals completed the homestead. 4 ranch hands were visible, going about their morning chores with rifles conspicuously strapped to their backs. Thomas recognized the tense alertness in their movements. "Your men are loyal," he observed, noting how they positioned themselves with clear sightlines to the approach road. Eleanor nodded, pride evident in her expression. "They've been offered triple wages to work for Hargrove. All refused." Her voice softened. "I told them to leave if things got dangerous, but Jacob, the foreman, said they'd rather stand with me than kneel somewhere else." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The recognition of something honorable in a world that often lacked it. "Keep them alive, if possible," he advised quietly. "Men like that are worth more than gold." Eleanor met his gaze, understanding passing between them. They both knew what might come. As they approached the ranch, Thomas noticed fresh hoofprints on the main road. At least 6 riders had passed through recently. He signaled Eleanor to slow their pace. "We may have company already," he warned, moving his hand closer to his revolver. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley, providing too many places for ambush. Jacob Morrison, a barrel-chested former cavalry sergeant with a salt and pepper beard, hurried from the barn as they rode into the yard. "Ms. Eleanor," he called, relief evident in his gruff voice. "Thank the Lord you're back. Hargrove's men were here at sunrise. Left this." He handed her an official-looking document, his disgust evident. Eleanor scanned it quickly, her face darkening. "An eviction notice," she explained to Thomas, "signed by Judge Holloway himself." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "It claims I have until noon to vacate before the property is lawfully reclaimed for unpaid taxes." Her laugh was bitter. "Taxes I paid in full 3 weeks ago." Thomas dismounted, taking the document and smoothing it out. The legal language was convoluted, but the intent was clear: theft dressed in judicial clothing. "How many men came?" Thomas asked Jacob, who was eyeing him with newfound hope. The former marshal's reputation clearly extended to the ranch hands. Jacob straightened, reporting with military precision. 6 riders led by that snake Reed. Said they'd return with the sheriff at noon." His weathered hand rested on his holstered Remington. "We're ready for them, Marshal." Thomas didn't correct the title. Sometimes a reputation was more useful than accuracy. "Show me your defenses," he requested, already assessing the ranch's vulnerabilities. The main house was well positioned, with clear fields of fire in most directions, but the western approach was partially obscured by a stand of cottonwoods, a potential blind spot. While Jacob led him on a tour of their preparations, Eleanor gathered her remaining ranch hands. Thomas listened as she explained the situation without sugarcoating the danger. "Anyone who wishes to leave can do so now, with my blessing and a month's wages," she told them. Not a single man moved. Thomas observed the loyalty she commanded, not through fear or money, but through earned respect. By mid-morning, Thomas had developed a strategy. "They'll expect resistance," he explained to the small group gathered in Eleanor's kitchen, "but they'll also expect it to be disorganized." He used cups and saucers to demonstrate positions. "They'll come in force. Probably split into two groups, one from the main road as a distraction, another through the cottonwoods to flank us. Jacob nodded in agreement. Classic cavalry tactic. I served under General Crook, saw it plenty of times. The other men, Sam Diaz, a young Mexican-American with quick reflexes and a quiet demeanor. Brothers Will and George Peterson, homesteaders' sons with rifle skills honed by necessity. And Caleb Washington, a former slave whose understanding of strategy had impressed Thomas immediately, leaned forward, absorbing the plan. We won't win in a straight fight, Thomas continued frankly, but we don't need to. Hargrove wants this to look legal, a rightful eviction with the sheriff present. If we can expose the corruption, force them to show their true intentions. He let the implication hang. Eleanor completed his thought. Then we have leverage, witnesses to their methods. Thomas nodded. I still have friends in the territorial capital, men who owe me favors. If we can document this, get sworn statements. He turned to Caleb. You can write? The man nodded, pride evident despite his matter-of-fact response. Taught myself after emancipation. Have fair penmanship, too. Good, Thomas replied. You'll be our record keeper. Stay inside. Document everything you see and hear. He turned to the others. Sam, take position in the hayloft. You'll have the best view of the western approach. Will and George, the house offers good elevation. Second-floor windows give you range advantage. Finally, he addressed Jacob. You and I will meet them out front. Visible, official. Eleanor will be inside until we determine their true intentions. Eleanor's eyes flashed. I will not hide in my own home while... Thomas cut her off, his tone respectful but firm. Not hiding, strategizing. If this turns, we need someone who can make it to the territorial marshal's office. He held her gaze. Someone they won't expect to slip away. Someone who knows which officials can still be trusted. A tense silence followed, until Eleanor nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I'll be armed. It wasn't a question. Thomas wouldn't have argued anyway. He'd seen her determination and suspected she could handle herself. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 11, reminding them that time was short. One last thing, Thomas said as they prepared to take their positions. No one fires unless I do, no matter what's said, what threats are made. We need to be the wronged party here, clear as day. His eyes moved from face to face, receiving solemn nods of agreement. If this goes sideways, aim for the leaders first. Reed and whoever's giving orders. Cut the head off the snake. As the others dispersed to their positions, Eleanor paused beside Thomas. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. You could be halfway to Colorado by now, safe. The question deserved honesty. So Thomas took a moment before answering. I spent 30 years enforcing the law, he finally said, checking his ammunition one last time. Watched it bend for men with money and power. Saw good people lose everything because they couldn't fight back. He adjusted his hat, pulling it low over his eyes. Maybe I'm tired of watching. Maybe this time, I need to stand. Eleanor studied him, seeing beyond the hardened exterior to something Thomas himself had nearly forgotten existed. When this is over, she said softly, whatever happens, thank you. Then, surprising them both, she leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his weathered cheek before turning toward the house. Thomas stood motionless for a moment, a forgotten warmth spreading through his chest. Then, with practiced discipline, he pushed the feeling aside. Sentiment had no place in what was coming. He took his position on the porch, checked the position of the sun, less than an hour until noon, and waited for the approaching storm. They came exactly at noon, as promised, the thunder of hoofbeats announcing their arrival before they crested the final rise. Thomas counted 15 riders, plus Sheriff Miller, whose paunchy figure and nervous demeanor contrasted sharply with the hard-eyed gunmen surrounding him. At their head rode Silas Reed, tall and lean in an expensive black coat, his pale eyes scanning the ranch with calculated precision. Thomas stood motionless on the porch, hands visible at his sides, Jacob flanking him a few feet away. He recognized the moment Reed spotted him, the slight stiffening, the quick reassessment. Good. Uncertainty was an advantage. The riders halted 20 yards from the house, dust settling around them in the midday heat. "That's far enough," Thomas called, his voice carrying easily across the yard. Recognition rippled through the group of riders, whispers passing from man to man. He saw fear in some faces, calculation in others. Reed, however, maintained his composed expression, though his hand drifted closer to his holstered pistol. "Marshal Blackwood," Reed acknowledged, a hint of Southern gentility in his cultured voice. "Your reputation precedes you. I was unaware you had business with Mrs. Wright." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is an unfortunate circumstance, but I assure you, entirely legal." He gestured toward Sheriff Miller, who produced a folded paper with reluctance. "Court order," Miller muttered, avoiding Thomas's gaze. "Signed by Judge Holloway himself. Mrs. Wright is in arrears. The property is to be reclaimed for auction." The sheriff's discomfort was evident. A man caught between fear of Reed and shame at his own corruption. Thomas descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately. "Interesting," he remarked, "considering I personally witnessed Mrs. Wright paying those taxes 3 weeks ago." He allowed the statement to hang in the air. Even more interesting that Judge Holloway would sign such an order when he's been in Denver for the past month. His wife's illness, you understand? Reed's smile faltered momentarily. Sheriff Miller shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now see here, Blackwood," Reed began, dropping the pretense of respect. "Your badge doesn't shine anymore. You're just an old man playing at authority." His voice hardened. "This matter doesn't concern you. Ride away while you still can." "Oh, but it does concern me," Thomas replied evenly. "You see, Mrs. Wright has retained my services. As a legally deputized agent of the Territorial Court, I'm here to investigate suspected fraud." The claim was a calculated bluff. Thomas had indeed served as a special investigator in the past, though he held no current commission. Reed wouldn't know that. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Reed's face. Several of his men exchanged nervous glances. Thomas pressed his advantage. "I've already dispatched riders to Judge Holloway's actual location. By tomorrow, the territorial governor will receive my full report." He allowed himself a small, dangerous smile, including sworn affidavits regarding certain financial arrangements between Hargrove Mining and local officials. Sheriff Miller's face paled visibly. "Now wait just a minute," he began, but Reed silenced him with a sharp gesture. The hired gun's expression had darkened, calculation replacing caution in his pale eyes. Thomas recognized the look, a predator deciding that direct attack was preferable to retreat. "I see," Reed said softly. "How unfortunate that a distinguished former lawman would resort to such desperate measures to protect a widow's worthless land." His hand moved fractionally closer to his weapon. "Perhaps Mrs. Wright has offered additional compensation for your services?" The crude implication hung in the air like gun smoke. Jacob tensed beside Thomas. But the former marshal remained impassive. He'd weathered worse insults from more dangerous men. "You have one chance, Reed," Thomas stated flatly. "Right away, tell Hargrove that this property isn't for sale or seizure. Find easier prey." Reed's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Or what, old man? You and this ragtag bunch will stop 15 armed men?" His eyes narrowed. "I've killed lawmen before. Adding another to my tally won't trouble my sleep." Several of his men shifted their horses, spreading out in a practiced formation that Thomas recognized immediately. They were preparing to charge the house. "Sheriff Miller," Thomas called, ignoring Reed entirely. "Are you witnessing this threat against a court representative? Will that be in your official report?" Miller's discomfort increased visibly, caught between Reed's intimidation and the very real possibility that Thomas's claims of investigation were true. If the territorial authorities became involved, the sheriff would need a plausible defense for his actions. "Now listen here," Miller stammered. "There's no need for threats. If there's some confusion about Mrs. Wright's status, perhaps we should postpone this action until—" Reed cut him off with a savage look. The pretense of legality was unraveling, exactly as Thomas had hoped. Force Reed to show his true intentions before witnesses. "Enough talk," Reed snarled, his refined manner abandoned. He turned to his men. "5 of you circle around through those trees, the rest with me. Anyone who resists gets a bullet." His hand finally closed around his pistol grip, starting with the old marshal. Thomas didn't move, didn't reach for his weapon. Not yet. "Final warning, Reed," he said calmly. "This property is lawfully defended. Any attempt to seize it by force will be met accordingly." He could feel Jacob's tension beside him, the ranch hands positioned around the property, watching, waiting for his signal. Reed's patience snapped. "Kill him," he ordered sharply. "Kill them all. Burn the house. We'll tell Hargrove they resisted arrest." He drew his pistol in one fluid motion, faster than a man his age should move, Thomas noted distantly, and fired. The bullet whistled past Thomas's ear as he finally reached for his peacemaker. Years of experience guided his hand, muscle memory taking over where age might have slowed him. His first shot caught Reed in the shoulder, spinning the man halfway around in his saddle. His second dropped one of Reed's lieutenants, who had drawn a bead on Jacob. All pretense of legal action vanished in an instant. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, Reed's men charging forward, while the ranch defenders opened fire from their positions. Thomas dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. Jacob fired steadily from behind a porch column, his military training evident in his disciplined shots. From the hayloft, Sam picked off 2 riders attempting to circle behind the house. The Peterson brothers, firing from upstairs windows, created a deadly crossfire that forced Reed's men to scatter for cover. Sheriff Miller had wisely retreated at the first shot, galloping away from the property as fast as his horse would carry him. Thomas reloaded smoothly, years of practice making the action automatic even under fire. Through the chaos, he spotted Reed dismounting behind a wagon, clutching his bleeding shoulder but still directing his men. The hired gun caught Thomas's eye across the yard and gave a mocking salute before disappearing from view. "Jacob," Thomas called over the gunfire. "They're trying to split our attention. Watch the barn." Sure enough, 3 riders had broken away, circling wide toward the ranch's outbuildings, likely planning to set fires as a distraction. Jacob nodded grimly, signaling to Sam in the hayloft to adjust his focus. The initial fusillade gradually slowed to more deliberate, aimed shots. Reed's men had found cover among wagons, troughs, and scattered equipment. Thomas counted 2 down permanently, 3 wounded, leaving at least 10 still in the fight. Not favorable odds, but better than they'd started with. A movement at the house caught his eye. Eleanor, emerging onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Get back inside," Thomas shouted, but she ignored him, taking position beside a porch column and firing at a gunman who had been working his way toward Thomas's position. Her shot found its mark, the man dropping with a cry of pain. "I told you I could shoot," she called back, ducking as bullets splintered the wood near her head. Thomas cursed under his breath, admiring her courage while fearing for her safety. He needed to end this quickly, before Reed could regroup his forces, or before one of the defenders made a fatal mistake. Thomas spotted an opportunity. Reed had moved to a new position behind an overturned cart, exposed momentarily as he directed his remaining men. Drawing a careful bead, Thomas fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed narrowly, but the second caught Reed in the leg, dropping him to the ground with a howl of pain and rage. "Reed is down," Thomas called to Jacob. "Focus on the others." With their leader wounded, the hired guns might lose cohesion. Some men fought for money, others for loyalty. Thomas needed to discover which type Reed commanded. The answer came quickly. Two of Reed's men immediately broke from cover, rushing to their fallen leader and dragging him behind better protection. Others intensified their fire, providing cover for the rescue. Loyalty, then, or at least professional pride. That made them more dangerous, not less. A cry of pain from the house drew Thomas's attention. Will Peterson stumbling back from a window, blood staining his shirt. His brother George immediately abandoned his position to tend to him. Thomas cursed silently. Their defense was weakening. He needed to change tactics before they were overwhelmed by superior numbers. "Jacob," Thomas called over the continuing gunfire. "Can you make it to the barn? We need to flush them out." The foreman nodded grimly, checking his ammunition. "Cover me on 3, he shouted back. Thomas nodded, preparing to provide suppressing fire. Before Jacob could move, however, a new sound cut through the chaos. A wagon approaching rapidly from the direction of town. Thomas risked a glance down the road and saw a surprising sight. A buckboard driven at breakneck speed by Caleb, who had somehow slipped away during the initial confusion. Beside him sat Judge Parker, the circuit court magistrate, known throughout the territory as the Hanging Judge, a man of uncompromising integrity. The arrival caused momentary confusion on both sides, gunfire slackening as all eyes turned to the approaching wagon. Judge Parker stood tall, despite the rough ride, his imposing figure and trademark black coat unmistakable. Behind the buckboard rode 4 armed men wearing deputy marshal badges, reinforcements Caleb had somehow managed to locate. Reed's men recognized the significance immediately. Several broke cover and ran for their horses, no longer willing to risk federal charges for Hargrove's money. Others looked to Reed for direction, clearly uncertain about this new development. Thomas seized the moment of distraction to advance his position, moving swiftly between cover until he had a clear line on Reed's hiding place. "It's over, Reed," Thomas called out. "Judge Parker himself is here with federal deputies. Surrender now or face the full weight of territorial law." He kept his peacemaker trained steadily on the spot where Reed and his remaining loyal men had taken cover. The hired gun didn't immediately respond, but Thomas could almost feel him calculating odds, weighing options. Judge Parker's wagon halted a safe distance from the conflict. The judge himself stood, his commanding voice carrying easily across the ranch yard. "This is Federal Judge Isaac Parker. All men currently engaged in armed assault on this property are ordered to surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in charges of attempted murder and criminal conspiracy." The effect was immediate. 3 more of Reed's men dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. The federal deputies moved efficiently to secure them, experienced lawmen recognizing the shifting tide of the conflict. Thomas kept his focus on Reed's position, knowing the hired gun was too dangerous to underestimate, even wounded. "It's finished, Silas," came a call from among Reed's remaining men, one of his lieutenants apparently deciding that loyalty had its limits. "Hargrove ain't paying us enough to hang." The sound of weapons hitting the ground followed the pronouncement. For a long moment, silence fell across the battlefield. Thomas maintained his vigilance, sensing that Reed wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. He was proven right a moment later when the hired gun emerged from cover, not with hands raised, but with pistol drawn, and a look of murderous rage distorting his features. "Blackwood!" Reed snarled, blood soaking his pant leg and left shoulder. "You cost me everything!" He raised his weapon, aiming not at Thomas, but at Eleanor, who stood exposed on the porch. Time seemed to slow as Thomas pivoted, bringing his peacemaker to bear with the speed that had made his reputation decades earlier. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Reed's bullets splintered the porch column inches from Eleanor's head. Thomas's struck true, catching Reed center mass. The hired gun staggered backward, surprise replacing rage in his pale eyes. He managed one final defiant smile before collapsing to the dust, his weapon falling from lifeless fingers. Silence fell once more, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the nervous shuffling of horses. Thomas moved cautiously toward Reed's body, kicking the fallen pistol well out of reach before checking for signs of life. Finding none, he straightened slowly, feeling every one of his 52 years in the ache of his muscles and the heaviness of his breath. Judge Parker approached, his expression grim but approving. "Marshal Blackwood," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Seems I arrived just in time to witness the conclusion of your investigation." The emphasis on the final word made it clear that the judge understood Thomas's earlier bluff, but was willing to formalize it after the fact. "Your timing is impeccable as always, Judge," Thomas replied, holstering his weapon. "Mrs. Wright has been facing some irregularities regarding her property rights." He gestured toward the fallen Reed. "Mr. Reed and his associates were attempting to enforce fraudulent claims on behalf of Maxwell Hargrove." Parker's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Hargrove again? This makes the 3rd complaint regarding his methods I've received this month." He turned to survey the ranch, taking in the damaged buildings and the defenders emerging cautiously from their positions. "Mrs. Wright, I presume?" he asked as Eleanor approached, rifle still in hand. She nodded, straightening her posture despite the exhaustion evident in her features. "Your Honor, thank you for coming so quickly." She glanced at Caleb with newfound respect. "Though I'm curious how my ranch hand knew where to find you." Caleb ducked his head modestly. "Judge Parker always stays at the Silver Dollar Hotel when riding circuit through Redemption Creek. Just fortunate he arrived yesterday instead of tomorrow." The young man's initiative impressed Thomas, another quality worth more than gold out here. The aftermath unfolded with the efficiency of justice long denied, but finally served. Judge Parker's deputies secured the surviving gunman, treating the wounded and preparing the others for transport to the territorial jail. The judge himself reviewed Eleanor's documentation, his indignation growing visible as the extent of the fraud became clear. "This is a clear conspiracy to deprive a citizen of lawful property through forgery, intimidation, and ultimately violence, Parker declared, making notes for the official record. I'm issuing an immediate injunction against Hargrove Mining Company regarding any claims on this land. He glanced up at Eleanor. Mrs. Wright, you will have the full protection of my court until this matter is permanently resolved. Eleanor's relief was palpable, though tempered by the knowledge that Hargrove's reach extended far. What about Maxwell himself? He'll just send others. Her concern was valid. Removing Reed was like cutting off a snake's tail. The head remained dangerous. Judge Parker's smile was cold and precise. Mrs. Wright, Marshal Blackwood's actions today have provided me with sufficient cause to issue warrants for Maxwell Hargrove on multiple counts of conspiracy, attempted murder through proxy, fraud, and corruption of public officials. He gathered his papers deliberately. I'll be riding to Denver personally to oversee his arrest. As the judge and his deputies prepared to depart with their prisoners, Thomas found himself standing beside Eleanor on the porch, surveying the damaged but intact ranch. Jacob and the other hands were already beginning repairs, their spirits high despite their wounds and exhaustion. The immediate danger had passed, but Thomas felt an uncharacteristic reluctance to leave. You'll stay for dinner at least, Eleanor said, reading his thoughts with uncanny accuracy. It wasn't a question. The judge won't reach Denver for 3 days. Hargrove might make one last attempt when he learns what happened here. Her hand found his arm, a gentle but firm pressure. Besides, you're bleeding. Thomas glanced down, surprised to discover a graze along his ribs that had soaked his shirt with blood, an injury received and forgotten in the heat of battle. Age made such oversights dangerous. Just a scratch, he muttered, though he made no move to pull away from her touch. Even scratches need tending. Eleanor replied simply, "Come inside, Thomas. Rest a while." Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. Not just the capable businesswoman or the determined landowner, but the woman beneath those roles. Their eyes met, and an understanding passed between them that required no words. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across land that remained rightfully hers, Thomas Blackwood followed Eleanor Wright into her home. Perhaps retirement didn't have to mean solitude after all. Perhaps there were battles still worth fighting and victories still worth savoring. "You know," he said quietly as they crossed the threshold together, "Hargrove won't forget this. Even if the judge puts him away, he has friends, men with long memories and longer reach." He needed her to understand the path ahead, that today's victory might lead to tomorrow's danger. Eleanor paused, turning to face him directly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "Go back, Thomas," she said softly. "You'll die with me," she warned, her voice gentle despite the harsh truth of her words. She was offering him an exit, a return to the peace he had sought in retirement. Thomas smiled then, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his weathered face. "Better beside you than safe alone," he replied simply, closing the door behind them as the day's last light painted the Montana sky in hues of fire and promise.